Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon Training presented by This.Labs. I'm Sarah with This.Labs and I will be your host. Our next session is iOS, Android, and Web in One. Happy to introduce our trainer today, Joe Reckley, software engineer at This. Welcome, Joe.
Hello.
JavaScript Marathon would not be possible without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com. This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. If you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle and want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies, contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. We have a lot of upcoming special events. We're rounding out the year with our last Global View meetup, featuring our very own CEO of This. Tracy Lee and Mike Hardington. More details are available at this.co. We also have monthly mentoring session coming up next month, January 20th, and our Global View meetup, January 21st. And last but not least, JavaScript Marathon returns Wednesday, January 20th. Follow us on This.Labs on Twitter for more details. And with that, I am happy to hand it over to Joe.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about how to build a multi-platform app with React Native and other tools. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you are someone interested in doing this. Maybe you are starting a project from scratch, or you have a native project that you want to build the web into, or vice versa. Hopefully this will be interesting for everyone. Okay, so I'm Joe Reckley. I'm a software engineer at This. I'm currently into React Native development. My past has been in full stack engineering, product development, and UX design. You can find me at GitHub at Joe Rex. Okay, so what are we doing today? First, we want to define what is a multi-platform app, because different contexts, you'll have a different definition for this. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Then we'll be describing situations when building this kind of app is a good idea, when your app requirements really make this a process you want to go down. Then we'll be exploring directions you could take to get there. Maybe you're, like I said, starting a project from scratch or adding web to an existing React Native app. Lastly, we'll walk through some techniques you can use when you are developing for native and web. We'll look at aliasing native modules, using file extensions, and using the React Native platform object. Okay, so defining a multi-platform app. The obvious thing here is that the app runs on native and in the browser. So whether or not it's iOS or Android, we really are talking about either one of those or both of those and the web, right? The other requirement is that some amount of code is shared. Ideally, most code is shared, and ideally, the tooling is the same between platforms. And we're going to get into the different variations there. And also, what isn't a multi-platform app? So even though iOS and Android are different platforms, we really are including the browser here because that makes things a little more complex. Lastly, there are products that have both mobile and web apps, but there's no code shared between them. So we're really talking about apps that have code shared between them. Okay. So when would you want to adopt a multi-platform approach? Again, the obvious answer is if you need something that runs on native and web. But it's important to really consider this because you don't want to add unnecessary complexity to your process. If you know you need a web app, but maybe you don't need a React Native app yet, you might be better off just go ahead and building that web app and saving that time and effort for whatever you want to do after that. Another thing you want to think about when you're considering this approach is whether your app is similar enough across platforms to easily share code, because sometimes the difference in functionality, the difference in your layouts, they could be variable enough, they could be different enough to make it easier not to share code and not to have a multi-platform app. So in the end, it's possible that this might be more trouble than it's worth. Lastly, from an organizational or business perspective, this would be a good approach if it fits your team's skill set. So we're going to be talking about React Native specifically. So if your team is JavaScript engineers, if you have React Native engineers on your team, this is going to be a really good, efficient approach. If you're using other languages or frameworks, the cost of learning React Native and JavaScript might be, again, more trouble than it's worth. And also, please feel free to pop any questions into the comments box. Hopefully I get into everything adequately, but if I gloss over anything, please let me know. Okay, so what are the starting points for a multi-platform app? You could either be building an app from scratch, or you could be adding native to an existing web app, or vice versa. So you have options for both. When you're building from scratch, it might be a good idea to start with Expo. And we're going to get into Expo in depth here in a minute. Another option would be to start with React Native and add Webpack and the other dependencies you would need to run React Native in the web. If you're adding native to an existing web app or vice versa, you might want to consider creating a new Expo app and then adding your existing source code to the app. Another possibility is that you add React Native or Webpack to an existing code base. And depending on your situation, any of these could be the most efficient way to go. Okay, so we're going to start with Expo. What is Expo? Expo is a framework and a platform for building universal React applications. And the keyword here is universal. It means the same thing as multi-platform in the sense that we're talking about. It's an app that not only runs on the native platforms, but also runs in the web. Expo comes with a CLI and an SDK. The CLI allows you to initiate projects, manage the dependencies, and with some of the managed workflow, which we'll talk about, you're also able to build your apps for the App Store. The SDK provides you APIs and components to add universal functionality to your app, and we'll talk about some of those. Using Expo is as simple as installing the Expo CLI globally with npm, and then you can create a new project with the Expo init function. Okay, so the next thing to talk about with Expo is the different workflows. We have managed and bare. Managed, you'll never have to worry about native code or native tooling. You are able to build apps for the App Store without Xcode or Android, but you have a lot of limitations. You really can't use native dependencies, and a lot of native APIs are not available. However, you always have the option of ejecting your application, which essentially will give you a bare workflow. And a bare workflow incorporates a lot of the benefits of Expo CLI, but you can also do everything you can do with a native project. And just to give you a little sense of what this looks like, I'm going to init, a new project. And you can see we're given some choices here. First, we can use a managed workflow or a bare workflow. Secondly, we can choose to use TypeScript or not. And then for a managed workflow, we can initiate some boilerplate code to provide us with a couple screens and some navigation. It's kind of just an easy way to get a little further when you start, and you can just replace the boilerplate content with your own content. And one thing about my presentation is that I already have a few projects set up. I don't want to take the time to install dependencies or build native code. So we don't need to do this. So let's keep moving. If you're not going to use Expo, you have some other options. And it really depends on whether you're adding web support to React Native or React Native to a web app. And in the situation where you're adding web support to a React Native app, you can, like we talked about before, initiate an Expo app and add your existing source code to it. What's great about using Expo in general is that you don't have to deal with Webpack. If you don't use Expo, you'll have to add Webpack and React Native Web to your project. And what React Native Web does is it allows you to essentially you use that instead of React Native. So you alias a module, you alias the React Native module, and we'll talk about this, about module aliasing. But you'll alias the React Native module, and React Native Web will go ahead and take your React Native APIs and your components, and it will allow them to work in the browser. And it will create DOM elements for things like your view and your text that you'll see in React Native. And we'll take a little bit closer look at that later. You'll also have to add Webpack because React Native doesn't have a way to bundle for the web. So you'll need to use Webpack for bundling your code and for any kind of development that you want, like the Webpack server. There's some other ways to do this. You can eject a Create React app and use the Webpack config and scripts that come along with that. It's at least interesting to see what you get when you do that. And you can incorporate those into the React Native app. You can also just go ahead and write your own custom Webpack config and scripts. I would suggest, if possible, to use Expo unless you are a Webpack guru. Webpack can be very difficult to work with, and Expo does a really good job of doing all of that heavy lifting for you. Okay, so vice versa, adding React Native to a web project is a little bit different. React Native Web will take your React Native components and translate them into DOM elements, but it won't take your DOM elements and translate them into React Native components. So you will either need to replace your React Native components with DOM elements, or you will need to create different files for both native and web, and we'll talk about that some too. I'm sorry, let me go back. One other thing, you'll need to add your React Native dependencies and tooling to your web project, and you'll probably have to set up either Xcode or Android or both to really get the tooling that you need. Fantastic. Okay, so let me read some of these questions and then we can jump into some coding. Okay, so one of the questions is about translating into HTML and CSS, and that's what's great about React Native Web, is that it will take your React Native UI, and you'll be able to use most of those components in your web app without doing anything. And there's ways to work around it if React Native Web doesn't handle it for you, and we'll go over some of that as well. And this other question, what do you recommend having in mind when delivering mobile experiences so we can add value versus responsive websites? That's a great question. Responsive websites are great. They work on mobile very well in the browser. However, you don't get the native feel of a native app in the browser. There's a lot of transitions, there's a lot of feeling gestures that go on in a native application that you just don't have in a web application. Furthermore, there's a lot of things you can do on a native platform that will provide an extended experience for your users. Like you have a file system, you have geolocation, you have a accelerometer, you have a flashlight, you have a camera. You can expand your user's experience quite a lot using native APIs. Thank you for those questions. Okay, so let's do some coding. Like I said, I've already set up a couple projects. And the first project we're going to talk about is the situation that you might find yourself in where let's say you have an application, it's using a Bear Expo workflow. So it's running both in iOS, in our case, as well as in the web. So if I start Expo, I'll show you a couple things, and then we'll get to coding. First is the Expo dev tools here. They've done a really good job of making this super user-friendly. You can do quite a lot right off the bat with the dev tools. If you're using a managed workflow, you can pop open an Android or iOS device. If you're using a Bear workflow, you're not going to be using this, but you can open this in a web browser. See, if I do that, it's going to start a Webpack bundler and hopefully open this in my browser. So there we go. We're building with Webpack. That's fantastic. And while that's working, I'll say this QR code can be used by an iOS phone or an Android with the Expo app if you're using a managed workflow, which can be really nice. So here we have a multi-platform app. This is great. We didn't really have to do anything. You can see iOS and web are working correctly. That's fantastic. So this is our starting point, Bear Workflow Expo app. And now what we want to do is we've decided we want to show a PDF in the app. Like the only thing this app is supposed to do is show a PDF. And for React Native, or for the native experience, we want to use this package, React Native PDF. It's pretty popular, but the reason I chose it is that it's not able to run in the web. This is very much a native. It has a lot of native dependencies. You're not going to be able to do some of the installation process with the managed workflow, like run pod install. In fact, this package has maybe is a little outdated, but you have to do some native manipulation to get this running in native. And actually, I've used Xcode to build this, right? So you can see I have Xcode open. I've ran this using Xcode. You should also be able to run this using yarn start. However, I'm running it in Xcode. So that's our situation. And so how do we do this? Well, first we want to install the necessary packages for React Native PDF. And those include, obviously, React Native PDF, but also we need a React Native fetch blob, and we need these progress views. Other than that, we've also installed Webpack config, and I'll show you why in a minute. So since we have all these installed and we've gone to our iOS folder and we've run pod install, we have all our native dependencies installed, we can go ahead and bring that into the project. And we'll just replace this with the PDF component. And this takes a source object that needs to include a URI, and I've picked a PDF here, just kind of a random PDF that we'll use. And we'll see if this works. Okay. So what we're going to do here is just reload. In fact, we'll quit this for now since we're going to just try to get this native running, and hopefully my my build hasn't failed on me. Okay, so we're good to go here. We don't see anything, and that's because we need to add some styles to this. And what we need is a flex grow so that it takes up the whole height. We also need another property that will allow us to stretch this across the screen. There's different ways to add these styles. That's not the point of this presentation. So we're just doing this we're adding these inline styles just to get this running. And here we are. Now we have a PDF running in the web. And that's my phone. So sorry about that. Let me just stop that. Okay, so we have a PDF running in React Native. That's fantastic. We do not have this running in the web yet. And in fact, this shouldn't be running in the web, but we want to get it to running in the web. So we'll just open this up and try to run it, see what we get. And what we're going to end up doing is having to add a module alias. We want to alias the React Native PDF module, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to zoom here. I've never actually zoomed. I apologize for that. I should have had a better Zoom situation set up. If you're familiar with IntelliJ and you want to show me how to do that, please do. I apologize. For now, I will keep moving forward. Just give me 1 second. Command ++ did not work, but thank you. Trying all sorts of pluses here. Now I've frozen. Okay, well, we'll try to move forward as best we can. This is an error that we're getting. I'm sorry, apparently I'm muted now. Okay, sorry about the hold up here. I'm having some technical difficulties. Let's try to keep moving forward, and I will do the best I can. So we have this error. What we want to do is remove this error. And the reason that we have this error is because of we added this PDF. So if I get rid of that, we can see that we will just have a blank screen. So we know that this module is the problem. The question is, how are we going to deal with it? So one thing that we can do is create a separate module that will allow us to use this same code, the PDF component, but also have it run in a browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component called PDF, and it's going to be used really just for the web. So I'll just create a components directory, and I'll add a pdf.tsx. I'll import React for all JSX, and I will create a new component, PDF. It's just going to be a component that takes a source object, and like I said, that consists of a URI. So I'm just going to write out the type here. Be a string. And then what I want to do here is actually use the HTML object tag, right? And so the object tag will take a type, which we're going to say is the PDF. Also shift command ++ is not working for me. I'm not sure what's going on here. I apologize if this is too small. We can put this in a repo at some point. But for now, I'll continue. The source that we're going to use comes directly from the source. So we can say source.uri, and we can close that off. So, and then we'll export it. All right, so there, now we have something that should work. I'm sorry, this actually needs to be data. We should have something that will take a PDF and just display it in the browser. So now the question is, how do we use this instead of our package, right? We don't want to change any of this code, right? The idea is that we can reuse this code and just have different modules be loaded for different platforms. So the way we can do that is using a customized Webpack. And I'll just show you the documentation here. In Expo, they have a guide for customizing Webpack. And it's as simple as creating a Webpack config and then calling this customize function. So we'll create a Webpack config. And you can see their example, they've already set it up so that we can easily alias a module. If you weren't using Expo, you can do the same thing with Webpack config. It'll look a little different because you won't be calling this function to get that config. It'll just be right there for you. The idea is the same though. It's that we're going to alias React Native PDF, and we are going to use a path, which we'll need to import. And I think what we want here is path dot resolve. Their name, and then components and PDF, right? So this is saying alias this module with the code that you can find in the current directory, and then components directory, and then finally in the PDF file. So let's see how this does. I need go ahead and try to just reopen this in the browser. We're still having a little bit of the same error actually. Let me restart the Expo server. Right, because Webpack, anytime you make a change to Webpack config, you actually need to restart Webpack. So that is a critical step here. Now we can say run in the web, which should run Webpack again. All right, fantastic. So we have our PDF. It looks a little weird, but we can simply add some styles to it. This actually, we're just going to give it a width of 100% and a height of also 100%. And this should expand the screen to our full screen. And there you go. So now we have a multi-platform app that's using a React Native module that's not available in the web, but we've aliased that module and used a custom component to replace it. That's fantastic. All right, so we've done that. Now we want to work on another example. So what I'm going to show you now is a managed Expo app. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my Bear app from running. I'm going to go ahead and start this over again. And when we're using a managed workflow, we're actually going to be able to use the Expo app. So everything that you see in the dev tools, like the QR code and the link, now we can just run this, click this run, and it will connect with the iOS simulator and get that started for us. And I'll show you the managed example. You can see in this code base, there's no native directories. There's no iOS or Android directories. In fact, this looks a lot like a Create React application. So you don't have to think about native. It's all taken care of for you. And you can see this opened up the Expo app. It's bundling that JavaScript. And now we have it working. And we're also going to go ahead and open this in a web browser. And so what we're trying to set up here is an example that will show how to use file extensions and the platform object to develop both native and web code and try to use as much of that as possible, reuse as much of that code as possible. All right, so here we are. We have our basic app set up. That's great. So let's remove, let's actually start with a new component. And the idea here is that we'll create a button component that when you click it, it alerts you and asks you a question and asks you if you want to confirm that click or say no. So basically, we want a button that will create an alert pop-up where you can say yes or no. One thing about the React Native alert component is that it doesn't work in the web. So we're going to have to figure out a way to get around that. So we'll call this alert button. And again, we will import React and create our component. Doesn't need any kind of props for now. And it's going to return a button from React Native. We'll say, do you want, or I'm sorry, for the button, we'll just say go. And for the on press, we will create a handler to deal with that. So let's create that handler. And see what we can do. So with React Native comes an alert object, and we can use that here. So when we're handling the press, we can say alert, and which also has a function alert, where we get a title, and we'll say, do you want to continue? And then we will we'll just leave the message blank. And then we have a buttons array. And what we're going to do is add a both a yes and a no button, and have them really not do anything, but it'll be good to just show what we can do. And I'm just referencing the alert here. So we have an array. Let's just go ahead and bring this onto a new line here. All right, so our first button will have the text yes. And we'll give it a callback just to illustrate what's going on. You don't actually have to do this. And then we'll give it a button of no. And we'll also have a callback here. We'll also add a style to this of cancel. Okay. So let's see what happens here when we run this. First, we need to actually use it. And to do that, we need to export it. Yeah, again, I apologize for not being able to zoom in here. I don't know what's going on with my zooming. We will have a repo so that you guys can reference this, and I'll try to talk through it as much as possible. So for our alert button, we will import that. And see how that works. We'll need to refresh this. Perfect. Okay. So now we have a go, and we have a confirmation dialog. It's not going to do anything. You can see we have the output here. And you can kind of go in whatever direction you want to with this alert. The point is that it's not going to work here. I'm clicking this right now, and it's not doing anything. So the question is, how can we now deal with this? The first thing I want to show you is that you can use a platform object from the React Native code base. And you can say, if the platform operating system is web, then we're going to want to do something else, right? There happens to be a function on the window object in a browser called confirm that will do the same thing, essentially. This will return a Boolean, and you can go ahead and do whatever you want after you get that confirmation or not. But we will just go ahead and do nothing for now. So here we have now code that asks first, if this is a web platform, run this function. If it's not a web platform, that means it's either iOS or Android, and we can run this function. So let's see if that works. Boom. All right. That's fantastic. Now we have the same functionality on both platforms. Okay, that's great. What if we want to do something a little different? What if this is too messy, or like, what if instead of what if we want to customize our DOM element, for instance? What we can do is we can create different files with different extensions. So I'm going to differentiate. I'm going to create a new alert button, and differentiate these with either web or native. And native actually includes both iOS and Android. You can also specify iOS or Android, but for our use case, we're just going to deal with Android and iOS in the same way. So now we're in this web version of the alert button. So really all we want is this. So we can just delete all of this stuff. And in fact, we can make this a button that will simply respond to the on click, and it will say go. It doesn't look right there, but you can see in the native version, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to only use the native code, and this is already native, so we don't have to change that. We have a little bit of a problem with our, oh, I'm sorry. So now we go back here and you can see my IDE is giving me trouble here, but the reality is that React Native will determine these anyway. It'll determine which platform you're on and which file to pull from. So I'm having a problem with my button. For now, I'm going to revert this. And because we're using React Native Web, this should work fine. Okay, so in the components alert button, it's not finding this module. Might have to restart this. I'm not sure why it's not refreshing this module here. If you add this web flag to the end, it will automatically pop open a React Native or a Webpack version. We are actually getting near the end of the session, so I just wanted to call out one more time if anybody has any questions. I know there's some issues with the zooming, but if anybody has any general questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer. I'm still getting an error here. Let's see if we can figure that out. Okay, just the problem with packaging modules happens all the time. So you can see this does the exact same thing. It just does it in a different way, right? So depending on the complexity of each component, how much differences there are between the native and the web versions will determine which direction you want to go when it comes to using these different techniques. But hopefully this is enough to get you started with building multi-platform apps. So that's what I have for you today. Feel free to answer any questions, but that's the show.
Thank you so much, Joe. Awesome work. I do think that we have answered all our questions. We can see if we have A couple more left. If anyone has any lingering questions, feel free to drop them in the comments box below. And we'll see if we have any more. And it looks like we are good on questions. Again, if you're watching this again, feel free to drop some comments in the comment box. We will get back to them as soon as possible. Thank you so much for tuning in. Joe, you did an awesome job. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Yes, thank you.
We will be back with Kyle Matofsky. He will be back 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time. So stay tuned. Head on over there soon. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. We will see y'all soon.